Insomniac Spider-Man games. Bear with me here, I know this video is supposed to be about Batman. Insomniac Spider-Man games are great, very fun, amazing graphics, great web swinging. However, they didn't invent the Spider-Man game. Many people would argue that games like Spider-Man 2 or Web of Shadows are better than either of Insomniac's games. Rocksteady's Batman Arkham games. Do you ever hear people argue whether they're the best Batman games? To take it further, do you ever hear people discuss Batman games outside of this series? At all? I know I don't. I love Batman, he's my favorite superhero and he was long before Arkham Asylum came out, and yet I never played a Batman game prior to that one. So that made me wonder. So for this video I'm going to be covering 6 games, 3 from the PS1 and 3 from the PS2. From the PS1 we have Batman and Robin, Batman Gotham City Racer, and Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. And for the PS2 it'll be Batman Vengeance, Batman Rise of Sin Tzu, and Batman Begins. Let's start with the PS1 where I have to stipulate that I didn't actually finish any of these games for various reasons. Let's start with Batman and Robin. So if you want a really good review of this game, go watch this video by Re-Res. They cover the whole game start to finish and provide much more insightful commentary on it than I could. My main takeaway from this game is that it's one of the most insane yet interesting things I've ever played. So Batman and Robin the movie came out in 1997, the same year as this game. That movie is generally regarded as pretty bad, but I look at it and think it's very clearly supposed to be a movie for little kids. I mean, you have Arnold playing Mr. Freeze, come on now. However, no fucking way could any kid ever finish this game. So let's begin with the controls. Being a PS1 game that has tank controls and you can't control the camera at all, that's fine. Resident Evil had tank controls and those games are great. However, unlike Resident Evil, Batman and Robin doesn't always have fixed camera angles. What the camera actually does is just kind of limply follow you around, adjusting as it sees fit. Oftentimes the camera will shift to a new angle halfway through a room, completely disorienting you. It's honestly kind of nauseating. The camera is far from the worst part about the controls because these fucking developers thought the controller just didn't have enough buttons or something. When you press L2, you toggle between investigation mode and combat mode. Investigation mode allows you to jump, use gadgets, and interact with things, while combat allows you to do various punches and kicks. L1 and R1 also change to a block and a roll when you activate combat mode, so while you're in combat you can't jump without switching back to investigation mode, which then prevents you from attacking. There's also other weirdness like how only sometimes when you press the circle button in investigation mode you'll use a healing item. You can also go into first person mode by holding R1. It actually allows you to see shit because you control the camera, which is useful for aiming gadgets, but not much else. Speaking of gadgets, you can use them in combat, although you have to first switch to investigation mode to use them. The main use for them though is cases like breaking down walls, or sometimes you'll need very specific gadgets for very specific situations, like a certain type of missile that if you run out of, you simply can't progress. You can play as 3 characters, Batman, Robin, and Batgirl. Batman is the strongest, but he's also heavy and slow, which means that he can't jump super high and some floors will even collapse under him. Robin is lighter and can jump higher, but still has pretty good health and attack. Batgirl is very fast and light, but is the weakest in combat. All 3 have their own vehicle, which you'll use a lot in this game as it actually has a pretty big open world, that being Gotham City. It's actually really impressive for the time, although it does suck ass to travel in. I'll say this much, Robin and Batgirl's bikes are a lot easier to use than Batman's Batmobile, because it's fucking huge and barely fits in the street. You still have the tank controls by the way, and to add to the suffering, Gotham is infested with criminals who constantly harass you as you drive down the streets. You have these armored tanks, exploding ice cream trucks, and motorcycles just constantly harassing you. Also, the police will sometimes just set up roadblocks right in the way of where you need to go. I mean, thanks guys, you're really helping with the situation. If you die, you get treated to this cutscene of the Bat family being executed, then get sent back to the main menu.
Come and get me, if you can.
The enemies themselves are kind of inconsistent with their difficulty, like sometimes they're pushovers while other times they jump you the second you walk in somewhere. Fighting enemies is still not great, but I will say that it works better than you think it would. Generally, when you throw an attack, Batman will orient himself towards the nearest enemy. You have 4 basic attacks, which are just various punches and kicks. Then you can also use gadgets like gas batarangs and missiles. Now you can save anytime you're in the Batcave or see a Batcomputer, but I emulated this game on DuckStation, so I just constantly save the state of the game, which is definitely cheating, but ask me if I give a fuck. If you use the inbuilt save system, each time you die you go all the way back to the main menu, then have to load back into your last save, then exit the Batcomputer, which is 3 separate long-ass loading screens. The biggest point of difficulty in this game is the fact that you're on a time limit the entire time. Batman not only needs to survive, but also to stop Mr. Freeze's various crimes at the exact time he commits them, otherwise Freeze gets stronger and stronger until he's basically unbeatable in the final fight at the end of day 1. Well, how do you know what time he's going to be committing crimes? You have to find clues, these little question marks, which are scattered around the levels of the game, but also hidden all over the open world, so if you don't find enough clues to learn where the next crime happens, you're fucked. The problem is that clues are randomized, so you can't just look up where a valuable clue is, you just have to get lucky with the ones that spawn in levels or farm them by spawning events around the city. To be fair, I don't think you actually need clues if you know where to go, but for a first time player or like a child, the system is insanely inaccessible. Now I played through most of Night 1, which there are 3 of, and it took me like 3 hours. I used a walkthrough from Dr. Attitude, aka Al Scourge Balog, that famous wrestling archivist you find everywhere. And this is... and this is no fault of his, but I gave up because I did some of the events out of order, then got lost and didn't know what to do. Let me walk you through my most productive attempt at playing Batman and Robin. So your first task is to put together 2 clues to find out that Mr. Freeze is going to attack the Gotham City Museum to steal a diamond. So you rush over there only to find out that he hasn't attacked yet. You can't just steal the diamond preemptively, you have to use the game's waiting feature to wait like 30 minutes until Freeze finally does attack, at which point you can then go in. Now inside, if you kill too many Icemen, I do mean kill by the way, Freeze himself will appear, so you don't want to do that. You have to wait around until Freeze drops the barrier around the diamond, then steal it yourself and escape. Next you need to piece together where his next attack would be, which is where I went wrong. The guide kept telling me to go to the World of Rings jewelry store, but my in-game clues pointed me towards the Crown Jewel store, which is actually the last one you're supposed to do. Now I don't really know how the timing works on this because it let me do the Crown Jewel robbery early, but didn't allow me to do the World of Rings one late. Anyway, there's 4 required robberies. The first 3 are in these jewelry stores that get increasingly more and more maze-like as you go on. You have to activate various switches to open the vault and steal the diamond before Freeze's minion, Frosty, can get it. If you fail at that, you then have to fight Frosty to get the diamond, and if you don't beat Frosty in time, Freeze gets away and is stronger for the final boss fight. So I ended up doing the last one first, then the second one, then I couldn't do the first one but my guide said I could skip the 4th one, Glitterati. So I just skipped that, only to then not be allowed into the final robbery, Botanical Gardens. I'm sure I could have figured it out, but at this point I'd been playing Batman and Robin for like 3 hours straight and I just couldn't take it anymore. This was after like 2 other 2-hour-long play sessions trying to figure this game out. I know I just chat all over this game, but hear me out here. You know how some people will say a game is impressively bad? Well, that's not the case with Batman and Robin. This game is both impressive and bad separately. The open world is huge for a PS1 game, and despite the driving control sucking, it's honestly impressive that they got this system working at all. I mean, you can drive anywhere you want in the city, exit as Batman to walk around, then get back in and start right back up. I feel like if they would have waited a generation and made this game for the PS2, and also probably not based it on that shitty movie, it might have been one of the best Batman games. Now as for the story, there's not much of one, but I do want to say that the whole clue system is kinda cool. Very bad and unfun in execution, but a cool idea. I actually wrote a different script for this part when I'd played even less of the game, but it just kept calling out to me, like drawing me in to play through more and more of the game. The highest compliment I can give this game is it's interesting and unique, which is not something that can be said for either of the next 2 games. When I say the name Gotham City Racer, what type of video game comes to your mind? Well, for me, I think of Mario Kart but with Batman characters, which seemed like it would be a slam dunk. Everybody loves Mario Kart and everybody loves Batman, and this game could have been huge. Well, that's not what Gotham City Racer is. I don't even know what the term for video games like this is. I would describe this game like something you see included with a DVD set, in this case for Batman the Animated Series. It's super low effort, pretty boring, and wouldn't even keep a little kid entertained for more than an hour. So Gotham City Racer has you driving through the streets of Gotham, racing towards certain objectives, not racing other people. It has a story mode, a free patrol mode, and then a 2-player versus mode. I have the most to say about story mode since that's the main meat of the game, so let's discuss. There's not much of a story, but in between levels I will play clips from the animated series to keep you entertained.
Attention, people of Gotham City.
So this game has 3 fundamental mission types. Number 1 is drive somewhere within the time limit. In the early levels these are pretty easy, but later on Gotham City becomes a literal maze of dead ends and detours, but I never actually failed one of these missions. I played 27 of I don't even know how many missions, and the vast majority of them are in this style. Drive to the objective within the time limit. You can pick up these money tokens, which I have no idea what they do, get extra time, health refills, or these orange ones, which I also have no idea what they do. Occasionally, but not often, You will be pursued by an enemy on this level. These guys are indestructible, so you just have to run from them. These levels are super boring. What's also boring are the more rare tailing missions, where you have to follow a certain Batman villain through the level without getting in front of them, as that would result in them seeing you. Rather than having a time limit, these levels fail if you let them get too far away from you or see you. Boss attacks vary, in appearance anyway. Like Two-Face sets mines, Joker throws boxing gloves, and Poison Ivy grows vines, but a lot of them do have unique attacks. Finally, we have the most fun, although still pretty boring. Boss fights, where Batman chases a villain through the street shooting at them with his giant batarangs while they throw various traps behind them. Like for example, Harley Quinn and Joker can throw laughing gas at you, which messes with your controls, and Killer Croc can make little slime puddles which cause you to skid out. The boss fights are definitely the highlight of this game. I mean, luckily they're the entire focus of the patrol mode, where you get to set a time limit for your patrol as various bosses spawn around the arena. You can play as Batman, Robin, Nightwing, or Batgirl. You can probably guess what vehicles each of them have. I couldn't play the versus mode since I have no friends, but I'm sure that would have been the most fun mode of the game, as you can select any of the heroes or villains to play as. This game isn't like horrible or anything, it's just very boring and uninspired. Now, unlike Batman and Robin, Batman Beyond Return of the Joker is, on the surface, a competent video game. To be fair, it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, so it's not exactly complicated formula, but still. The graphics are nice, it tells the story from the movie well enough. However, similar to Gotham City Racer, this game is just super unfun. Unlike the previous two games where I didn't even really try to finish those games, with this one I was one boss away from beating it. However, I lost to that final boss and got sent back to the beginning of the final level, which took me like 30 minutes to beat in the first place. I decided to try again. But after losing 2 of my 3 extra lives to falling down pits, I was like, never mind, this fucking game sucks. So why does it suck? Well, to put it simply, imagine a beat-em-up game with no combos. Batman has plenty of weapons and 4 different suits to mess around with, however none of them have any combo attacks. His base suit has the batarangs, which are useless, a staff, which is also basically useless, a set of nunchucks, which you can charge at to do more damage, but are also useless. 2 out of the 4 suits are useless in fact, those being the base suit and the offense suit. The nimble suit is only useful for traversal, as they give you a double jump and a glide. In my humble opinion, the defense suit is the only way to play this game. What the defense suit does is it makes your block absorb all damage, so with this suit all you can really do is stand there blocking until the enemy hits you, get one of your own hits in, then go back to blocking until you can repeat the process. The reason why that's the only strategy in this game is because enemies attack lightning fast, way faster than you can attack. And because of the lack of combos in this game, you can't stun lock most enemies, as the second you're done attacking, they launch their next attack. They also love to just wait until the exact millisecond between you dropping your shield and you attacking to hit you with their instant attack. This means that the only really viable way to play this game is to hide behind your shield constantly, getting your attacks in whenever you can and still getting hit often. Now I will say this, ranged enemies can actually hurt other enemies, so in the last level you can use these flamethrower guys to take out the big guys, but it's still not exactly a quick strategy. You know, these type of games are supposed to be quick and action-packed, but in this one all you do for most of the fights is just stand there. Also adding to that is the fact that you don't do much damage. Now obviously you could do more damage if you wear the offense suit, but then your block barely blocks any damage at all, so that's not even a valid strategy. So just accept that you'll be doing 5 damage per hit into enemies that can have anywhere from 40 to 120 health. There are like 4 and 1/10 levels in this game. The first 2 levels are pretty easy, but these robots that jump around are annoying. The latter 2 are just horrible though. Level 3, Arkham Asylum, is filled with these kicking enemies that attack so fast. I swear to god their kick is faster than yours is. They're not shy with these enemies either, throwing you up against like 8 of them in a row at one point. The 1/10 level is this one part where you have to escape a lab by destroying a case with the key in it as a laser shoots at you. The last level has these awful giant enemies that also just attack at the speed of light, but you can get them with the flamethrower enemies if they're present. The bosses are kind of fun. The first one is just some guy in a crane. The second is a big enemy that has these shockwave attacks, which is super easy. Third is this hyena man who jumps around the arena a lot. Fourth is a weirdly easy boss fight with this woman who will jump away anytime you hit her. When she jumps away, these gargoyles spit fire at you, but you can just block the fire, hit her again, then repeat until the fight ends. You then have 3 on the final level, a big guy with a gun, a cloning machine which is actually the most interesting boss, and then the Joker. Like I said, this game is the most competent of the PS1 Batman games, however it really does suck to play. Reviews from the time agree with me, so I'm glad people in the year 2000 had good taste. So let's recap the 3 PS1 Batman games. Batman and Robin is a horrible yet very interesting and unique video game. Batman Gotham City Racer is just boring, and Batman Beyond Return of the Joker is very poorly executed. In comparison to the PS1 era of Batman games, I actually think the 3 PS2 games are pretty decent. Not perfect, but I did finish all 3 of them and generally, and I mean generally, had a good time with them. Batman Vengeance is actually pretty good. It just has a couple glaring issues. So first of all, unlike all of the PS1 games, I did actually finish this one. That's because it's actually a fun game. Vengeance takes the character designs from the animated series, which means it's not super graphically intensive, but it looks fine. Now right off the bat, this game has a major difference from the others so far, and that is that this is a 3D platformer. Sure, there is combat in the game, but that's definitely not the focus. I would put this game in the same category as something like Mario 64 or maybe SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. Anyway, I'm a hater, so let's talk about the problems with this game first. The most glaring one is the controls, which actually kind of take a page out of Batman and Robin's book. You still can't control the camera, and just like Batman and Robin, occasionally the camera will be at a fixed angle, which is where it works the best, but most of the time it just follows you around. There's no tank controls this time, however what there is not much better. Basically pressing forward or backward on the stick causes Batman to move forward or backward, obviously. However, pressing left or right actually moves the camera to the left or the right while Batman continues moving forward. So you can't just turn to look at something in third person without Batman walking forward and often right off ledges. The solution is first person mode, which you toggle into with R2. In third person, the right stick just does nothing, however in first person it actually gives you free control over the camera and you can now walk around normally with the left stick. I don't know why they didn't just have it that way for both camera modes, but whatever. The only way to use gadgets is with first person mode where you have to manually aim them. Due to that, a lot of the boss fights will take place entirely in first person and it's actually kinda cool. However, in first person you cannot jump, which is a big problem for a platformer game. So anytime you need to parkour, you have to switch to third person and back to the janky-ass camera system. That's not the only cue it takes in Batman and Robin though, because there's also a very different control scheme for when you enter combat. You don't just toggle it this time, rather when an enemy hits you or you hit them, it automatically turns on, blocking your camera on the enemy and allowing you to strafe around without the camera going crazy. Your jump button becomes a kick button, which is kind of annoying because that means you can't start up a fight with a kick because you're not yet in combat mode. I'll talk more about combat in a minute, but for now let's talk about the platforming itself. So Batman's glide, which you do by jumping and then holding down the jump button, is way jankier than it looks. Specifically, he just refuses to grab onto ledges a lot of the time, resulting in death. The camera also constantly fucks you. Now usually you can just enter first person and readjust the camera, or if you press R1 outside of combat it centers the camera on your back. However, there's one section in particular that is just horrible. You have to jump on these mushrooms that tilt as you walk across them, so when you jump onto the shroom, your camera will be facing the opposite direction of the next shroom you need to get onto. So by the time you get your camera adjusted, Batman will have fallen off the mushroom. The controls just kind of fight you at certain points like that, like in the aforementioned example when you need to enter first person to grapple while on one of those tilting mushrooms. The biggest problem with gliding is just a lack of consistency, like you never know what ledges Batman will and won't grab onto. In another example, you have to glide onto the edge of these molten metal filled pits, but Batman won't grab onto the edges of the pits. So you have to glide at very specific angles to be able to land on the edge without going into the lava. Alright, now let's talk about my second problem with the game, although it is a little more minor than the last one, and that is that this game doesn't tell you shit. The biggest example of this for me is when I discovered 75% of the way through my playthrough that power attacks exist, which made the combat way more fun. There is a tutorial at the beginning of the game, however it never tells you about power attacks, so I had no idea what this weird bar under my health was, and I thought the combat was way worse than it actually is, until I just randomly stumbled across the power attack section of the menu. Another great example of this are the boss fights, many of which have to be solved in a very specific way with a specific gadget. For example, to beat Mr. Freeze you need to knock down these pods traveling above the arena with a remote bomb. Then later to beat a big planet monster you have to knock its legs off its perch with batarangs, then throw some more at the pipe it was hanging onto to spray it with steam. The only possible way you could have figured that out would be by hovering your crosshair over the exact section of the pipe you need to hit, which would then make your crosshair turn red. However, you have like 2 seconds after knocking the planet's leg off before it reattaches itself. You know how in Batman Arkham, Batman is constantly talking to himself? Like if he needs to throw a remote-controlled batarang, he'll be like, how do I get through this gate? Maybe something remote-controlled? And then if you still don't get it, he'll be like, I need to use a remote-controlled batarang. That never happens in this game. You, the player, are supposed to be on par with the world's greatest detective and figure out creative ways to beat the bosses. Weirdly, you can press the select button at almost any time to radio Batgirl. I thought it would be like Metal Gear Solid where you can radio her if you get stuck. But no, most of the time she's just like, you need to get past that enemy and stop Poison Ivy. Like, thanks bro, I knew that. Another example, you know how modern games get shit for throwing yellow paint all over important ladders and perches? Well, if you hate that, I invite you to play this game, where the ladders are dark rusted metal in a game that's always dark and filled with metal. Like I said with the gliding, some ledges Batman just simply won't climb, but you won't know that until you go for it and possibly die in the process. This game is not generous with checkpoints either, which can be especially annoying in those aforementioned platforming sections, where just one wrong jump or maladjustment of the camera can send you back to the beginning of the level. Alright, I think that's all the bad I have to talk about for this game, but before we get into the good, I have to talk about the combat. It's alright. Serviceable would be the word I would use for it. So unlike the Arkham games, they don't throw 30 enemies at you at a time, so that's not how combat works here. In fact, it's very one-on-one focused. You can block with R1, punch with square, and kick with X. Enemies will block about 90% of your normal attacks, but when they do block them, they often fit in their own attacks between yours. It's honestly kinda like Batman Beyond, and that was going to be my opinion on it until I discovered power attacks. You unlock power attacks by earning points on levels. They're performed by holding down L2 then pressing one of the face buttons. Power attacks are unblockable and do a pretty decent amount of damage, look great, and knock enemies down. You charge up a meter in the top left by landing or having your attacks blocked, which makes it really easy to get a lot of power attacks when the enemies block so much. A lot of enemies will carry guns with them. You can either knock their guns away by hitting the enemy or throwing a gadget at them. However, once you down an enemy, you'll need to handcuff them or they'll wake up in like 30 seconds with about a quarter of their health back. Most of the boss fights don't actually involve this combat system. I can only think of 3 where you actually use it. 2 against Joker, which is really the same fight twice, and then 1 against the big plant man. Given that, let's talk about the bosses of Batman Vengeance. So up first is Joker, and it's more or less just like fighting a normal thug who has way more health. Then you fight Mr. Freeze, who you can only damage by knocking out the tanks over him. This one's kind of boring, to be honest. Next is the massive plant guy I mentioned before, and this one is pretty fun. He has enough new and unique attacks that it's actually pretty refreshing to fight him. You can't just beat him though, you have to do enough damage to him while you're both standing near a ledge, after which cutscene will play of him falling down into the molten metal. And of course they tell you none of that. After that is the giant plant tripod thing, which is a really cool visual design, but like I said, they never actually tell you that you need to shoot its legs and then the pipes behind it. Next you have to fight a police helicopter, which at first shoots electricity to stun Batman, but pretty soon the police go lethal with missiles. In this one you have to stick a remote bomb on each of its spotlights. It's not super hard since the cops very rarely actually shoot at you, but it's fun anyway. Next up is Fatty, who's just a giant guy covered in missile launchers. The only way to damage Fatty is hit his rocket launchers just as he loads a missile in, but right before he shoots it. Fatty only has like 3 attacks, a basic missile attack, a big bomb, and a flamethrower if you get too close, but he's fun nonetheless. Then you have one final fight with Joker, which is the same as the first except he does way more damage. Besides the moment-to-moment platforming levels, Vengeance has multiple Batmobile and Batplane sections where you chase someone through the streets or air of Gotham City and have to destroy them while dodging obstacles. There's very few of these, which is a good thing because it would get old really fast, but since it doesn't, they're a good break from the rest of the game. Finally, the story of this game is actually pretty good. It tells a good Batman story about Joker basically faking his death, while Harley leads Batman on a wild goose chase, eventually resulting in Joker having enough Joker gas to destroy the entire city. The last video I made was on the Punisher game, and in that video I said that game's story was great because it feels like a comic book, and this game has the same effect. It's entertaining. So to conclude the section on Batman Vengeance, this game is very solid. It just feels like you're fighting the controls more than you are actual enemies.
The art of war is deceit. First, you must attack your enemy when he least expects it. In a place where he feels strong, but is in fact weak. With an army he feels he has already vanquished. At midnight the battle begins. The battlefield is Gotham City. My adversary is Batman, and I shall be the victor.
Batman Rise of Sin Tzu is actually a sequel to Batman Vengeance, although gameplay-wise it's very different, being a beat-em-up game. You actually see the 4 villains you defeated in that game locked up in Arkham, and the 4 you face in this game are completely different. Now right off the bat, for the first half of this game, I thought it was super fun. Easily the best game I've played so far, however the second half, holy fuck man. They cranked the difficulty dial so high after the second boss, and just like me when I was 15, they never stopped cranking it. But in order to talk about that, you'll need to know about the gameplay of this game. So you can play as 4 characters, although really they fall into 2 groups. Batman and Nightwing are slow but do very high damage, and Robin and Batgirl are the opposite. I tried out all these characters, and for the first half of the game, Batgirl was my favorite. She's fast enough so that you can basically interrupt every enemy before they can attack you, and because of that you get to rack up insane combos. I'm sure Robin is the same, but I didn't actually try him till the second half of the game, and at that point I think Batman or Nightwing are the only way to go. So almost every level in this game has the same objective: rescue civilians. There are other ones like defuse bombs, which is basically the same thing, but there are a couple unique ones like defending doors from enemies. Anyway, rescuing civilians is like 75% of them, then defusing bombs is like another 10%. On these levels you start out with a time limit, and each time you rescue a civilian you get more time. Each civilian is guarded by a big enemy, which have more health and are immune to grab attacks. We'll talk more about that later, but what you learn towards the end of the game, when time is very short, is that you don't get a static amount of time for rescuing each civilian. You get only enough time to get you back to a certain limit, usually around like 3 minutes. So what you need to do to save time is aggro the big enemy without saving the civilian, so that when you do save them you get the max amount of time possible. If you do end up running out of time, it'll consume one of your lives in exchange for 15 whole seconds. Thanks, I guess. Anyway, the basic enemy structure in this game is that there are street fighters who can block punches but not kicks, and then martial artists who are the opposite, and finally guys with weapons which can't block anything but do way more damage. In the beginning of the game you don't really need to worry about this, as Scarecrow's guys will only block your first attack, then Clayface's will block your first 2, but when you get to Bane, certain enemies will block every attack in their specific style, and then finally when you get to Sin Tzu, every fucking melee enemy can block their attacks. Now that alone is a cool and unique mechanic. It makes you use some of that neuroplasticity to switch between the 2 attacking methods. Enemies with weapons can just have a melee weapon, which is pretty simple, but they can also have ranged weapons. This starts with Scarecrow's gooners being able to throw fear gas grenades, which if they hit you will cause every enemy to heal to full, and be dressed in a cheap Halloween costume. It also puts this fisheye effect on your screen, which is annoying but doesn't honestly affect much.
Mustn't give in.
Control the mind.
Clayface has these guys with guns for arms. They shoot clay at you that leave shit all over the ground. Bane combines these two mechanics. He has guys who lob Molotovs at you and other guys with missile launchers. The problem here is that enemies can just juggle you back and forth with projectiles, so if you get hit with a Molotov, it knocks you down, at which point you can then get hit with another Molotov, which also knocks you down, and by the time you struggle back to your feet, the missile launcher guy shoots you, doing half your health bar and knocking you down again, giving Molotov guy number 1 a chance to throw another one. I'm exaggerating, that exact series of events never happened, but I did get juggled by Molotovs a couple times. Sin Tzu soldiers introduced by far the worst group of mechanics in this game. So the Street Fighters are these guys with claw hands that do insane damage, and the martial artists are just so insanely fast. Sin Tzu's guys also have magic. Their first type of magic is just a Molotov with more range, but the second type is the Sin Tzu Ray, which flashes a PNG of Sin Tzu on your screen before reversing your controls, which I probably don't have to say how devastating that is in a beat-em-up game.
Got to.
The craziest part though is that basically every enemy towards the end can cast these spells. At first it's just these red warriors, then it becomes these monk guys, and then pretty much anybody can hit you with the Sin Tzu Ray. This is all on top of every enemy being immune to half your attacks. It gets to a point where basically every level was taking me an hour to beat, and that was with me abusing save states on the emulator. I played this game on normal difficulty by the way, and to add insult to injury the game calls you a bitch and says to replay it on the higher difficulty at the end of it. So now that you know what you're up against, how can the Bat family fight against this? Well, by landing combos you fill up this power attack gauge, which when full allows you to perform power combos. The combos themselves do good damage, but the best thing they do is make you invulnerable while charging up your power attacks. You earn points for getting combos, which at the end of the level allows you to unlock upgrades. The most useful combos you can do are the ones that stun enemies, as they allow you to continue the combo and rack up more points. You can also do attacks to launch enemies up, but those require delaying your inputs, which is not possible for a simpleton like me. Power attacks are also basically or literally required to beat the boss fights. Scarecrow is probably the best. He'll hit you with fear gas, which makes the arena fill with mist and you see these ghosts. What you have to do is stand still and watch the mist for disturbances until you can see where Scarecrow is, then when you attack him the fear gas wears off. It's pretty cool. You can charge your power attacks on the ghosts or on Scarecrow, and once you can do power attacks you can actually do decent damage on him. Clayface is a little less fun. You first have to run around the back of the arena until you can hit each generator 3 times with a batarang, which shocks Clayface. Once you shock him, you can then attack Clayface for a minute until he snaps out of it, throws a couple attacks at you, then spawn some enemies to feed your power attack meter. Repeat a couple times and Clayface goes down. Next up is Bane, and it's not bad, but it takes forever. Bane first stage just has you dodging his charge attacks, which knocks him off balance and allows you to attack. The first stage is super easy, but once you down his first health bar, Bane pops some venom and you have a whole new health bar. This time you have to get him to charge into a wall to attack him, after which he slams to the ground and causes some rocks to fall from the roof. The rocks have no shadow or anything by the way, so you have no idea of where they're gonna fall. This fight is super repetitive and takes like 10 years, but the next fight is even more repetitive and takes 11 years. Sin Tzu is completely immune to everything except power attacks. He'll usually dash around as soon as you try to attack him, so you have to dash into him to get some attacks off to charge your power attacks. The other way to hit Sin Tzu is to wait for him to attack. You have to dodge 4 of his attacks, after which he'll be open to your attacks. When you hit him with a power attack which actually damages him, he'll either start his own attack or jump into the middle to hit you with a Sin Tzu nuke, then spawn some enemies to feed you. Honestly a pretty easy fight if you have like 10 to 15 minutes to spare. Now at this point you're probably wondering, who the fuck even is Sin Tzu? Well, the game doesn't really answer that beyond that he's a Chinese warlord who named himself after Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War. I actually thought he was Sun Tzu when I first played the game, but apparently he's somebody different. They actually invented this character just for this game, but he didn't appear in anything for like a decade after its release, which is not really a mystery if you play the game. The story is basically Sin Tzu mind-controlling Scarecrow, Clayface, and Bane into attacking Batman, all the while Sin Tzu is hiding in Arkham Asylum waiting for Batman. The game isn't exactly story-heavy, so you don't really see Sin Tzu much, so like I said earlier, you really don't know anything about the guy by the end of the game. There is a tie-in comic with the game, but I never learned to read, so I guess I'll never know how it is Sin Tzu has super speed, or how he mind-controlled Batman's greatest villains. Overall, the story is fine, I guess, but if you wanted to play anyone other than Batman, you'll just have to accept the fact that they're hiding off-screen while Batman does all the talking during the cutscenes. All in all, Batman Rise of Sin Tzu is a pretty good beat-em-up that is just so goddamn hard towards the end.
What in the name of... Get me down from here! What are you staring at, you slack-jawed morons? Lower this damn thing! Ah! What? What?
Hi, you. I'm Batman.
Finally, we have, in my opinion, the best pre-Arkham Batman game, Batman Begins. Of course, it is a tie-in game with the movie that came out in 2005, and of course it plays clips from the movie in between missions. But the crazy shit that Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Cillian Murphy, and pretty much every other Hollywood star from the movie voices their character in the video game. Most of the time anyway. Occasionally there will be just a piece of dialogue that goes unvoiced and you can only read it on the subtitles, assuming you even have those on.
Batman, come to join my tea party. Crane. I'm through playing games, Crane. Life is a game. So yes, maybe you are.
But this game is really good, man, and in a lot of ways it feels like a prototype for Arkham Asylum, which would then come out 4 years later. I would call this game primarily a stealth game, though towards the end it does get a little heavy with the combat sections. First of all, I don't usually think it's worthwhile to comment on the graphics of old games, because 90% of the time if you played it back in the day, your ass would have thought it looked realistic. But in this case, I will say it looks really good for a PS2 game. Stealth is the main focus of this game, and the greatest compliment that I can give it is that this is the first piece of Batman media that's actually made me realize that seeing Batman in real life would actually be pretty scary. So in this game, Batman has no chance against armed enemies, like they'll melt you in milliseconds, so you have to get them to drop their weapons first. The main way you do that is by startling them, then you have to drop in on them before they pick their weapons back up. This usually involves knocking down some piece of debris, or in many cases, like bringing down whole piles of shit right above people. Like, listen Batman, I know it all ended well and everyone jumped out of the way, but if they hadn't, you totally would have killed them there. Plus, whenever you do a takedown from above, Batman will just lurk above their shoulder until the thug turns to see them. Building up fear in enemies is actually one of the core mechanics of this game, and when you build it up enough, they'll just cower instead of fighting you, and you get these cutscenes of them seeing Batman as some kind of demon. If you see in the movie, you know that 1, this is Batman's like first year on the job, and 2 is that Scarecrow is involved in the story. Both of these combining to add to making Batman actually seem scary in this game. Given that nobody knows who this Batman is yet, you'll hear enemies talking among themselves about him.
Grab her, follow me.
What about us? What about that bat creature?
I heard he can fly. I heard he can disappear.
We'll wait here for him. Find out if he can die. Let's go.
I actually really love it compared to the normal Batman goons who are just like, it's the Bat, when they see you. The plot of the game has Scarecrow forcing these guys to put his fear toxin in the Gotham's water supply, so they've all been in contact with the stuff, which only adds to them perceiving Batman as some kind of demon. You have to interrogate enemies pretty frequently, and Batman leans into his perception as a monster, never really dismissing the idea that he might actually eat their souls if they don't obey. Now this is primarily a stealth game, however it does have a lot of combat within it. It's not horrible, and in a lot of ways it does feel like Arkham Asylum's combat in particular, the main difference though being there's no counter in this game. So if enemies do start attacking you, your only real option is to counterattack them to interrupt them. The combat really isn't hard. I mean, if 2 or more enemies get close to you, you'll get the option multi-attack, which hits all of them and knocks them down. You can also use gadgets like smoke bombs and flash grenades, the former of which only works on enemies who have a high enough fear level. You can tell how scared an enemy is by their heart rate in the top left corner. By far the coolest thing that happens with the heart rate monitor happens in the final boss fight in quotations, against Ra's al Ghul, because his BPM doesn't rise a single digit the entire time. Like, of course Ra's al Ghul wouldn't be scared of Batman, especially since in this universe he trained Batman. I said boss fights in quotations because there's really only 2 and they're really just enemies with a tiny bit extra health. Those 2 being Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul. Neither really have any special attacks or anything, you just kind of beat on them like you would anyone else. Besides the usual stealth action gameplay, you actually get 2 really fun Batmobile levels, where you get to rampage through the streets in a tank mowing down criminals and pedestrian cars alike. Don't worry though, because whenever Batman flips a car, the game makes sure to specify that there were no casualties in the wreck. The second of these doesn't actually have you road raging criminals at all, it actually has Batman running from the cops, and in the process, totaling like 50 cop cars and giving half of Gotham PD permanent whiplash damage. As for the story, it's basically the same as the movie, however you do get some fun and unique areas like Carmine Falcone's penthouse, which is rigged with laser sensors and machine gun traps and shit, or Arkham Asylum where you get to hide from the police like Saddam Hussein and the US government. I love this game. It's not perfect by any means, but it is a great Batman game. So let's answer the question. What were Batman games like before Arkham? Well, Batman and Robin is insane, yet weirdly captivating. Batman Beyond Return of the Joker and Batman Gotham City Racer are both uninspired cash grabs. Batman Vengeance is a pretty good 3D platformer with pretty bad controls. Batman Rise of Sin Tzu nearly gave me a hernia, and Batman Begins is actually good. Thank you all so much for watching.